Hi, I'm Hi, I'm Jacqueline. No, damn it, what's happening?
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes. This is
Hi.
voice cracking crimes.
We've also been talking for like 30 minutes. It's not like all of a sudden I just have to, because like sometimes in a meeting if like you've been silent for a
Mhm.
long time and then you start talking, but like no, I literally haven't stopped talking. So I don't know why that just
Your presenter voice and your normal talking voice, your presenter voice wasn't ready, you know?
that's true. That's true. I just needed like a warm
That
up,
extra high pitch, the pitch up from your normal talking voice wasn't ready.
Oh man. We are here post Crime Con. This is our first
Mhm.
recording since Crime Con. If you guys are on Patreon, you got to hear us live at Crime Con. We also, I'm just now realizing, said like, oh, maybe we'll go live on Instagram. And we just didn't even think about
Never
that
did.
while we were there, not once.
Nope.
Um, but we did record each night and then in the car on the way home. Um, our recap of our days there. So,
Mhm.
of course, if you want to hear all about that, see some of our photos, little behind the scenes of everything we did and who we saw and everything at CrimeCon, that is again patreon.com/caffeinated crimes. But overall, we had a great time. We saw a lot of really amazing speakers and learned a lot, and just another great session at CrimeCon.
Yeah, it was super fun. Really, really interesting sessions, really kind of different, I feel like, than a lot of like what we saw last year, which was
Yeah.
nice. I mean, some similar, but um just again, a really great session. There weren't too many cringy moments. There's always a few cringy moments when you open it up to questions, but
Yeah.
so
I feel like some sessions they should just anticipate and not allow Q&A, which is
yeah.
sad because people who are respectful should have the opportunity to ask questions, but then you have people that aren't respectful and you can't trust that people are going to do the right thing. So sometimes in some specific situations, because I feel like you always know when it's going to be one of those,
Hmm.
I feel like maybe it would just be best to err on the side of caution and not allow Q&As.
Yeah.
But
Overall, still very good though.
yeah, and one thing I thought was really nice too, being able to go 2 years in a row, is like there were a lot of like last time there were so many sessions that were like, oh, I want to see all of these. And then this time you had some that were like same speakers or same like topics. So it's like, okay, like we were
Hmm.
able to have like I didn't feel like we missed out on as much as I feel like we did last time. You know what I mean? Because I feel like
Yeah.
there were things that we saw similar stuff last year. So it's like, oh, okay, I'm, more confident in choosing this one over this one because I feel like we've gotten a similar information or experience before. So that was
Yeah.
nice.
It was very nice. And I also bought a sweatshirt and it's really cozy.
It's a very
It's
cute
really
sweatshirt too.
it's very cute and cozy.
But we did have a couple of big updates while we were one literally at CrimeCon and then others
Mhm.
just during this week.
Yeah, so the big one that happened during Crime Con is Chad Daybell, which is the um him and Lori Vallow had basically been a part of murdering her children. He was found guilty, and then on Saturday at Crime Con he was sentenced to death. So
Hmm.
um pretty big. I feel like you don't see that as much anymore. I feel like there's
No.
definitely been kind of a moving away from that as much. It's
Yeah.
more like life in prison, life without parole kind of thing.
Hmm.
So pretty big sentencing, and it happened just a couple hours before a session with Lori Vallow's sister too. So
Yeah.
high emotions during that one kind of.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Very eerie
just
timing for that.
yes, definitely. But yeah, so I guess we'll see. I think we all know these kind of things take a long time. It's not like
Yeah.
in the old days where it was like sentenced to death, we'll hang you next week.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at
So
like 20 years if it ever
yeah.
even happens at all, because I feel like too, a lot of states are doing away with it even after,
Hmm.
someone has been sentenced and they're commuting all sentences to life in prison instead. So who knows, if it'll get to that point, but like you said, it's still pretty big for a jury to choose that for a sentencing.
Yeah,
Definitely.
definitely.
So also this week, Robert Picton, who, if you will remember, was the pig farmer killer in Canada between 95 and 2001. He's believed to have murdered at least 26 women. Unfortunately, many of them sex workers, contributing to how he was able to continue going for so long.
Hmm.
He did confess to 49 murders. And was sentenced to life in prison in 2007. But this week, he was killed in prison after an assault at 74 years old. So,
Good riddance.
yeah, not much more to say about that one.
Nope. Nothing too groundbreaking on that one.
Yeah,
Um, Speaking of groundbreaking though, this was pretty big,
yeah.
especially in the Long Island serial killer case, that we just recently had a suspect come out.
Hmm.
And he was only being charged with 2 to 3 of the murders. I don't think they
Hmm.
had fully connected him yet, but they've officially connected him with 2 more and charged him with 2 more murders, and that's of Jessica Taylor and Sandra Castilia. Stilia? I'm really sorry, Sandra. I forgot to look up pronunciation, but really big news because we kind of knew that he was connected to probably all of the missing women in that area, plus more. So now he's officially
Yeah.
getting charged with those, finding more evidence to connect him to more, and hopefully we can, you know, a lot of these murdered women whose cases are unsolved can connect to him and at
Hmm.
least get him some kind of punishment. It's not justice. I mean, it is justice, but it's not like closure. It's not
Yeah.
anything like that, but at least for their families getting to put like
Hmm.
a face to who murdered their loved ones. So,
Yeah, and I feel like too in those cases it has to be very frustrating when like you know that your loved one was killed by a serial killer who is like very likely the one who killed like there are a lot of similar murders and so they're like, okay, I'm pretty sure that this is the person who
mhm.
killed your loved one, but then you don't have that like finality of like knowing for sure. Um
Yeah.
so that has to be nice for those families to at least know like, okay, he was definitely charged with these murders as well.
And we'll probably like go to court and like their loved ones like names read out loud too, because that has to be so hard. Like probably for like maybe like Ted Bundy, for example. Like
Yeah,
he wasn't charged on all of them, but like
exactly.
only a few of them kind of got like in a court document their loved ones' names written down. That's kind of why with like the
Hmm.
Golden State Killer, they were like, you have to like read this statement of like all of these women whose crimes have passed the statute of limitations, read them so it's in a court document somewhere to be like, hi, here is a legal court document saying like it's your fault. Like this
Exactly.
is you. So,
Yeah, definitely. All right, so our sources for today's episode include an episode of Forensic Files, which is season 10, episode 42, Enemy Within, a Crime Scene Confidential, season 1, episode 6, called Doing Right by Richard, and also an article from the Nevada Daily Mail.
and if you try to find this Forensic Files episode, it has been scrubbed from the internet almost. If you do Google it, you will find a Facebook page that has the clip, and that's how we watched it. But kind of
Yes.
been scrubbed from any place that has it.
Yeah, they don't want this one out there anymore. But on May 5th, 2000, in Kansas City, Missouri, Richard Armitage was found behind his desk in a pool of blood. Shannon Miller, his secretary, was returning from lunch when she found him and called for his partner, Richard Buckley, to come help. So at this point, he was still alive, so she called 911. She could hear Buckley like clapping and trying to keep Richard awake and alert, and then Buckley moved Richard so he could start CPR. The 911 operator told Shannon they needed to stop the bleeding. So Buckley got a bag. He wasn't bleeding anymore, so Buckley threw the bag to the side, and then the paramedics were there. So Richard was rushed to the hospital and went into surgery. He did have swelling on his brain, so it wasn't looking very good. His wife, Kathy, was there along with their children. Richard also had children from a previous marriage, and then Richard and Kathy had a little girl together. Kathy said she told him at one point, if it's time to go, it's okay, you can go. Because obviously at this point, like his body is fighting very hard.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, Richard never regained consciousness. He died on May 7th, 2000. His funeral was at North Cross Methodist, and it was packed. People came in from various states to celebrate his life. So at the crime scene, they initially thought that due to the damage and blood that it was possibly a gunshot wound, but no bullet casings were found. And the autopsy revealed that Richard had been hit in the head 9 times with a blunt object, and the wounds were like crescent shaped. And there was a theory that there was a piece of artwork missing from Richard's desk that could have fit the description for these wounds. Also, maybe a hammer could be the weapon as well. It did seem like the killer was angry because the wounds were very deep, and police weren't sure if it was like passion or just anger. Like they're just kind of clueless at first. Like this is a pretty wild situation to find someone in. Richard Armitage was a lawyer whose practice was primarily related to organ transplantation and donation issues. So his heart and other organs were donated to 3 recipients. And the attack just shocked the community because, like we said, it was during the day in like a downtown office building. From what they could find, Richard seemed very well liked and respected. No one saw anyone leaving the building covered in blood. But forensic technicians did say it was possible for someone to commit this kind of attack and not have significant amounts of blood on them. From the way they believe the hits were given, the blood would kind of splatter more like out, like past versus like back at the person. Like it would kind of go like past the
Yeah.
body and not back on you as the killer, if that makes sense. I'm doing hand motions, but this is a
Yeah, I know
podcast.
and this one was really hard to figure out how to describe for like an audio
Yeah.
medium, basically. But if you happen to look up like crime scene photos, you'll see like the walls have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
blood on them. And it's because they think like when it was hit, it was like the splatter went out. So it
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be like this person was drenched in blood. There might
Yeah.
be still a few spots on them, of course, but not like
Mm-hmm.
walking out looking like Carrie after the prom,
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So both Richard's first wife and his current wife, Kathy, were ruled out as suspects. They did both have alibis. They spoke to his friends, but there didn't seem to be any recent arguments. And the forensic team believed that the first blow to Richard likely knocked him out of his chair, and after that, he just like didn't have a chance to move. The rest of the blows came while he was lying on the ground, and they didn't find any defensive wounds or signs of a struggle. And his shoes were sitting beside his desk, so they don't feel like Richard was expecting anyone. He would frequently take off his shoes, like once he sat down to like work at his desk, but he wouldn't go greet someone that he didn't know or like wasn't expecting without his shoes. So they think that he did know his attacker. Um, like we said, due to the blood spatter, they also believe his back was turned to the assailant during the attack. So detectives checked his calendar and he didn't have any meetings scheduled for that day. And phone records show his last call was at 2:01 p.m. and he then went online to do some shopping for his wife because Mother's Day was coming up. So remember, this is the year 2000, so you have dial-up internet. You can't be on the phone and the internet at the same time. So they think that he hung up the phone, started up the internet, and was then online. Also around 2:02 p.m., downstairs tenants said they heard 2 loud thumps that sounded maybe like a filing cabinet falling over, and these definitely seemed to be the start of the attack. So blood clotting typically takes place 3 to 15 minutes after an injury, and when EMTs got there, the blood was clotting, so they were able to narrow down the time of attack from 2:02 p.m. to 2:17 p.m. His secretary and law partner found him at 2:30 p.m. Richard Buckley said he was at lunch at the time, and so was his secretary. He said he left around 1:50 p.m., and no one else was in the office at that time. And they were also the only office on that floor of the building. Every other office was vacant. Richard Armitage also did collection work, so he was working for dentists, doctors, like some apartment complexes, and when debts weren't paid, Richard would send the legal documents to the people who owed his client money. So there was a suspect early on, and the Forensic Files episode and the Crime Scene Confidential episode do differ quite a bit. So it seems like they're talking about the same suspect, but they are using 2 different names. So it could be 2 different suspects, but their stories are very similar, so it's a little confusing.
very confusing.
So the Forensic Files episode said the suspect was Lou Campbell. They said that he had called in a few threats to the office and even made threats in person. They got a search warrant for his house and found a bloody shirt and pants, and the clothing was sent for DNA testing, but the blood was to Campbell and not Richard. So they say that this doesn't like fully clear him as a suspect because again, they believe that the attack could have happened without blood getting on the attacker. And the Crime Scene Confidential episode basically says the same thing, but uses the name Thomas Platt. And so they said he was the partner of someone being evicted. So they interviewed Platt and conducted a search warrant and found a shirt with blood on it, but it was found to not be Richard Armitage's blood. So again, very close stories. So we do think that it's the same person, but maybe they were two different suspects that had similar stories that were both ruled out. I'm also wondering maybe if one show used an alias and the other didn't. And so
Yeah,
that's
I was
why,
wondering about that too, but because I was
yeah,
like, I can't imagine like both episodes would say there was one suspect and this happened, and then they somehow be different people. Because I feel
yeah,
like if there was two suspects who were served search warrants, that you would mention both of them. So yeah, I wasn't sure if it was like an alias or what was going on,
yeah.
and couldn't really find anything else on that.
Which I feel like usually shows will like let you know when it's an alias, but I feel like
Yeah.
newer shows at least do. Like some of the older ones, maybe they would just use it and not say anything. So I feel like that's probably the most likely scenario. But again, just want to make sure you have all the info just in case
Yeah.
there were two.
Yeah. So detectives look at security footage, expecting to see Lou Campbell or Thomas Platt, depending which episode you're watching. But instead, they see Richard Buckley walking through the lobby at a different time than he claimed. So if you remember, he said he left for lunch around 1:50 p.m., but on the tape he was leaving at 2:06 p.m. So I know it's just 15 minutes, but obviously in this crime, every minute is important.
Yeah.
Buckley said, "Oh, he must have just, been off on the time he left, and the times are close." But now police are like, it's kind of possible he could have been in the office at the time Richard Armitage was killed. So it is very possible he was around there and should have seen something, heard something. And they were also alone for 5 minutes in the office based on when the secretary left. So again, now it's giving him like opportunity to be a part of the attack. But again, there was no blood found on Buckley, and they didn't find anything suspicious in his briefcase, which he'd been carrying in the security camera footage. So Buckley said when he left for lunch, Armitage was on the phone. And he said he went through the lobby and he went to a fast food restaurant, like he went to a Wendy's, but he said the line was too long, so he left. And then he picked up some office supplies, and the receipt showed him at the office supplies store at 2:22 p.m. Buckley had a cigarette outside the office, then ran into the secretary as they were going back in, and they walked in together at around like 2:30, 2:40 p.m. And this is when they found Richard's body.
Question. So
Yes.
did he end up getting any lunch or no? Because you said he went to Wendy's and the line was too long and he left.
It doesn't sound like he ever got food. There's at least not a
Okay.
receipt that was shown him. Because I was like, these places must be close together. If
Yeah,
you're
because that's
at the office supply store at 2:22 and then you're back here,
yeah. And you left at 2:06 and you went to the Wendy's first. But I'm also wondering, like, did you leave and go to this Wendy's to get a receipt for an alibi and the line was too long, so that's why you went to
yeah.
the office supply store instead? Because I'm like, oh, you left for lunch and then never got lunch.
Yeah, and there's also, again, a missing murder weapon that obviously could have been carried in his briefcase that they're like, is that where you were between 2:06 and 2:22 p.m.?
Yeah.
But they never like produced a receipt, and like it was more so the crime scene confidential one that was like, yeah, he went there, he said line was too long, he decided not to get food. So, very interesting.
Yeah, which I know not all people like eat every meal. I'm just thinking if I'm like on my lunch break and I'm going to get lunch and I'm like, oh, this line's too long. Well, I just won't get lunch. Like that thought would never cross my mind. But I realize not all people think that way, so that might not be as
Yeah.
damning as I think it is.
Yeah. It's very odd too that it's like, you know, I also thought it was weird that he like stands outside and waits until the secretary comes back to go back up. Like
Yeah.
he doesn't go back up on his own kind of thing. And as far as the security footage camera, there's also debates about whether the time on the video was correct. One detective checked and said it was kind of slow against his pager, but it's a 15-minute discrepancy. So it wasn't like a 15-minute slowness. It was maybe like a minute behind,
Yeah.
not 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So of course now Richard Buckley is officially a suspect. Um, and this story does kind of line up with what police believe had happened, around the time, all of that. However, Buckley had a few suspicious things in his background. So Buckley handled the civil cases for the office, and he was not doing very good. He was not a good lawyer, basically, to tell you he was not winning a lot of cases. And financial records indicated that Buckley had over $250,000 worth of debt. And this is in 2000, so it's probably a
Mhm.
lot.
Yeah.
And Kathy said Richard frequently had to try and help Buckley out of his debts. So, like, she kind of said it like robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's like a lot of people say, where it would be like, I'm getting all this money out to put into this case because it's going to pay off. And then he loses and he doesn't get that money. So then it's like scrambling.
Hmm.
And basically, Richard just got to the point where he was just done bailing Buckley out. He was like, I'm a good lawyer. I'm making money. And now all my money is going to you because you're a bad lawyer and ruining our name. And he was actually thinking of dissolving the partnership, which would have left Buckley unemployed. Another significant thing was Buckley was also the beneficiary on a $150,000 life insurance policy on Richard because they were business partners. So at first I was like, that's kind of weird, but it made sense where it was like, you're in a partnership together. You want to have a life insurance policy for both of you
Yeah.
because if something happens to the other one, like you're going to be screwed in the business. So,
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense because it's like your livelihood is tied to
mhm.
their livelihood. So if something were to happen to them, then there goes your business and you kind of have no backup. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it definitely gives him a motive now. He is in debt. He knows with Richard Armitage gone, he gets money, you know.
Yeah.
So investigators decide to send Buckley's shirt, jeans, and sneakers to a forensic lab, and there was high velocity blood spatter on his shirt. And a high velocity blood spatter isn't as easily seen to the naked eye. You kind of have to like zoom in, like with like a magnifying glass. Magnifying
Hmm.
glass, that's the word.
That's it.
Anyway, so this high velocity blood spatter can only be created when the person wearing the clothes is in close proximity to the blood source. So, Buckley's like, well, I moved him, I was doing CPR, but it's like this splatter is not from just like moving a body, it would be from like when it's happening.
Hmm.
And overall, there were 61 specks of blood on Buckley's clothing, all very small. And DNA confirmed the blood was Richard Armitage's. And Buckley said that he got the blood on his clothes when he went to save Richard and when he was clapping to see if he was conscious. So he was like clapping. And the reason he did this is he's claiming that when he was in the military, he was trained that's the best way to see if someone is responsive is to clap. So I don't know if that's
And
true.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if that's classic military training or not, but
I mean, I've never heard of it, but don't claim to be an expert, so
yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, it kind of makes sense where you're like loud noises to try and like be alert, but also just
Yeah.
kind of random to do whenever you find your business partner like bleeding out.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, and he's also saying that the clapping is what caused the blood splatter on him. So he's like, I moved him. I have blood on my hands. I'm clapping. So of course there's like blood going all around. Um, but there was blood on his shoes, and he was claiming that he was on his knees clapping. So how did it get all the way back to your shoes if you're just clapping? And both the prosecution and defense tried to make like reenactments of the blood splatter with clapping. However, they bring this up in the crime scene confidential. She's like a forensic tech. She was like, you can easily make an experiment be whatever you want it to be. Like, you want that to happen, you can make it happen. So that's not really like even blood splatter now is not a
Hmm.
definite science. Like,
Yeah. There's so many variables that, like you said, you can kind of adjust to make anything fit the narrative that you
yeah.
want.
In the end, though, most forensic experts believed like the blood on his hands would not go where the blood was found. And there was actually also blood found on the back of his shirt. So they're like, how could it get there and on your shoes if you're just clapping? They think it is from Buckley hitting Richard and then kind of going back up over his heads, kind of if you think of like when you're swinging an axe, and then the blood, after hitting from that. Again, I'm using a visual demonstration and y'all can't see it. But
Just
just
act it
imagine
out
that.
as we're talking and
Yeah.
you got it.
Yeah. So, you hit and then your hands go over your head to do another hit. And that's how the blood gets back there versus clapping. I don't really think it would get on the back of your shirt unless you're doing some weird kind of clap. And another point, as we mentioned earlier, 3 to 15 minutes after blood is shed is when it starts clotting. If the blood spatter on Buckley is not clotted, it can indicate that he was there at the time of the murder, versus if it is clotted, it would be indicating it would be done once the body was discovered and the blood on him was fresh and not clotted. So they're like, sounds like you were here like before you found him.
Hmm.
So Buckley was interviewed by police and they asked him about the surveillance video and the blood spatter on his clothes. And he became very quiet and asked for a lawyer, which he's a lawyer, smart move. And Buckley was arrested on May 15th, 2000, officially. And in July 2002, the trial against Buckley begins, and the prosecution showed how he had $250,000 worth of credit card debt, as well as other debts up to $30,000. So he's deep, deep in debt. And they brought up the life insurance policy, how they thought it could be a motive, especially if Richard Armitage was thinking of leaving the business. So they think that Buckley took the weapon to work, stabbed Richard after, well, attacked Richard after the secretary left, hid the weapon in his briefcase, and disposed of the weapon. He then went to the store for an alibi and waited on the secretary to walk back into the office. So Buckley testified in his trial. He actually got up and reenacted for the jury exactly how he pulled Richard's body, clapped, and performed CPR, I guess to be like, this is what I did, and try to like prove how it happened. And as we know, as people who listen to a lot of true crime, allowing the defendant to testify is very risky, and Buckley did not come off well. The jury did not like him. He came off as cold, annoyed, condescending. He just was not received well by the jury.
Hmm.
So Richard Buckley was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. There is a video of him after the sentencing. He just keeps saying, I did not kill him. I did not kill him, maintaining his innocence. And Buckley filed a motion to set aside the conviction on the basis of withheld evidence and that his lawyer was ineffective. So basically, this is based on the full surveillance tape outside of like the Power and Light building, which is like the building that they got that surveillance footage from. And it showed the whole day from 7 a.m. to past 3 p.m. But when they showed it in court, they decided to trim it down to just the time of the murder and show that. So he's kind of saying in his motion, the full footage was not turned over in court and that they should have played the full footage in court, basically. And he's saying, hey, someone could have came in way earlier, hid out in this big building, waited, killed Richard, then hid out and left way later, which is true. It's possible.
I mean, especially with like all the other offices like being vacant, like I mean,
Yeah,
it's
you
not
could hide
too
somewhere and
far.
then hide.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the prosecution disputes the fact that the full video footage was not made accessible to the defense. They said everyone had full access to the entirety of the video. They just decided to not show the full video because it was hours long, obviously 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And they were like, the jury is not going to pay attention to the entire video. They're going to fall asleep. They're not going to,
Hmm. Yeah,
nothing.
definitely.
They're not going to do this. But Buckley was granted his appeal and granted a retrial. So all evidence had to be resubmitted. So the prosecution had to turn all evidence over again. But in violation of procedural law, the prosecution misses the submission deadline. So they just didn't turn everything in when they were supposed to. And now the trial is thrown out and Buckley is exonerated.
Which is so wild over such
Yeah.
a small thing.
Yeah. All because you could not get your shit together and turn over evidence. Like, this is your job.
Yeah. Like th this
This
is
is
what
your
you
whole
do.
job.
Yeah.
So Richard's family is obviously devastated. Kathy, his wife, she's like, I don't understand how you could miss a death. Like, I don't understand how you could do this in such a big case. She kind of feels like something bigger is going on. Is someone hiding something? Like something felt off the fact that they just missed a submission deadline.
Yeah.
And in January 2009, the judge ruled that no prosecution evidence could be used. Basically, like any evidence they previously had could not be used, and Buckley was now free. And they can't use any of the evidence from the first trial. And so they can't go to trial again unless they find new evidence, like maybe if they found that murder weapon. But again, at this point, it's been 24 years, so I don't think that's being found. But
Yeah.
they have to have all new evidence to even try to go to trial again, which isn't happening, obviously. And so this was an episode of Did Forensic Files Get It Right? Because as I mentioned, Forensic Files has scrubbed this episode from the internet, likely due to Buckley being exonerated. Um, and it appears that, like, based on the prosecution's inability to meet a deadline, we'll never really know if it was right or not. Because there does seem a lot of evidence lining up against him, but it also does seem possible that he didn't get a fair trial. So,
Like, what a tough one to know what the
yeah,
hell happened.
yeah, because I mean, it is very possible it was someone else. I don't fully understand the blood all over his clothes if it was someone else. But who knows? Maybe I don't know.
I mean,
It's strange.
I feel like he's definitely the most likely suspect, but obviously there are
Hmm.
plenty of murders that happen that are not the likely suspect. And yeah, if you didn't get a fair trial to be able to prove your innocence, I mean, what
And
else are you going to do?
what a disservice to Richard Armitage's family because obviously they're not prosecuting anyone else. They just think he did it and they just fucked up. And so they can't
Yeah,
even get who they think did it a fair trial to like,
all because
it's just like
someone missed a
heartbreaking.
deadline to submit
Hmm.
evidence and paperwork. Like,
So bad.
yeah,
And how many other cases are happening like this in this area that just don't have an episode about them?
yeah, very true.
So shortly after his exoneration, the Missouri bar gave Buckley his law license back, so he is able to practice law again. And if Buckley is innocent or not, Richard Armitage's killer is still walking around free. Kathy was able to listen to the heart that Richard had given from organ donation. His recipient was Jean Sherrard. So they met up, and she said now they kind of have this like extended family that they kind of keep in touch with, and kind of, that Richard Armitage saved somebody. She said it doesn't replace Richard, but it's nice that something came out of the tragedy and that they're able to kind of have these additional people in their life. And that is the murder of Richard Armitage.
Yeah, just what a crazy one. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, because like I said, Buckley definitely seems like the most likely person, but then I mean, there is a whole day's worth of surveillance footage that could have shown something else that now we'll never know because that wasn't submitted.
Yeah. And the fact that like and the fact that like maybe something else was on that footage, but maybe it is ineffective counsel and the defense didn't look at the full video. So it's like, they could have found something and didn't, but then now you can't get a fair trial because someone fucks up and it's just like, damn, like
Yeah,
it's the whole thing is like so fucked.
it really is. It really is.
Oh man, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like we've kind of highlighted everything we wanted to talk about like throughout the episode, like the
Yeah, I
different
know.
discrepancies there. So yeah, that being said, Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week is I finally got to find out where my surprise birthday trip was. So I walked into an airport with no idea where I was going, but I was going to Boston. So Kevin had planned a whole little trip for us. We got to go to a Red Sox game, which I'd never been to Fenway, so that was fun. We got to go up to Salem and enjoy that a little bit, and then just kind of hop around the city, go see Harvard, just kind of explore the best we could. And that was so fun. And now we're like, what do we have to do in our lives to afford to live in Boston? Sell a
Good luck.
kidney, maybe.
So again, that's patreon.com/caffeinated crimes.
Yes, 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 yes. Go there, go there. But yeah, it was an absolutely amazing trip. It was,
hmm
I don't know, way past my wildest dreams of like what I thought the trip would be. It was so fun.
Are you-
It was it was so enjoyable. And then I got to come back and Jacqueline and I got to go to CrimeCon. So I had a very exciting week. It was like a lot of traveling and stuff, but it was a really, really amazing way to celebrate turning 30.
Yeah, a lot of travel, but a lot of fun travel, hopefully.
Yes, it was all fun. The work trip when I got back was not fun, but
Yeah, you
that was
know.
fun. That part was fun. But yeah, so that is my perk of the week. Jacqueline, what is your perk of the week?
So obviously I did not go to Boston, so my perk of the week would be our CrimeCon trip. But again, we kind of talked about this in the beginning, but we just had a great time. And then after the sessions, we watched two separate, like 3-part documentaries in our hotel room on Netflix. Ordered room service one night, got bougie and ate our room service in bed while watching our
Hmm.
true crime documentaries. And if that's just not like the pinnacle of living, I don't know what is,
Yeah,
Like it just
we were
doesn't get
living
any
our
better
best
than
life.
that.
Yeah.
And then also as an aside to that, perk of the week is that I no longer have to try to keep any secrets from Courtney now that we've had her surprise birthday party and now that she's had her surprise trip. I don't have to worry about slipping up about either of those things, which I've been worried about for the last like I don't fucking know, like 8 months, however long Kevin and I have been talking about this.
Did I tell you Kevin kind of slipped up on our way to Nashville?
Oh,
But
Kevin.
not he like played it off, but like basically he was like saying he was like, yeah, when we walk he was trying to talk about when we went to the Tampa game and he was like,
hmm
yeah, when we walked into the and he said like Red Sox game and he was like Rays game. And we were driving and I was like, "Oh, we going to Boston?" And then he just like whatever and I was like he was like, "Oh, I really thought I screwed it up there." And I was like,
Oh,
"No, it's
Kevin.
fine." He was like, "Fuck, like all this time and
Right.
this is where I dropped the ball."
That sounds about right. But at least you made it that far, And
Yeah,
it's not like you can like get on the plane and be surprised about where you're going. It's like, yeah, you're gonna see before unless he like blindfolds you and like puts earmuffs on you. But at which
I
point someone's
know.
gonna think you're being trafficked and you're probably not
Yeah,
gonna get there anyway. So
yeah, we will. There will be officers just talking to us. Yeah, he let me like when we walked in, you could see like the departures, and he
yeah.
gave me like the flight number so I could
Mm,
try to find the flight number. So,
that's fun. That's a fun way to do it
yeah.
versus just like walking up and you just like see it on the TV,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So,
cool. So yeah, if you want to let us know your thoughts on this case, have you ever seen this Forensic Files episode since it has
yeah.
been scrubbed from the internet? Where are you traveling to this summer? Tell us all the things. Um, Again, we are on patreon.com/caffeinated crimes if you want to receive some bonus episodes and hear all about our CrimeCon experience. And if you're not on Patreon, we are at all the other places in the show notes that you can find us to tell
Hmm.
us all of those things. I kind of went out of order. My brain's a little fried, as usual. My bad. Um, but yeah,
Yeah. I mean, patreon.com/crimes is the most important one. So
yes.
anything else, whatever. But if you could also give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere that has a rating system. And if you wouldn't mind to give us a like, a subscribe on YouTube. Only nice comments, not mean comments, because that makes Courtney cry. I'm talking to you, whoever the bitch was that just left a comment.
Also, if you're going to leave a mean comment, like listen to the whole episode. Like,
Yeah. So
just, general advice.
which brings up, if you really do hate our banter, like we can start putting in the show notes when the actual episode
Yeah.
starts if you are too lazy to just hit the skip button that many times, like whatever. But we're not doing it on past episodes. I am not going back
Mm-mm.
on all these episodes and doing that. But
Nope.
you can just skip until it sounds like we're ready. It's not that hard.
Exactly.
I do it on podcast all the time. So,
Yeah, you can figure it out.
yeah. But in the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.